Hello, everyone. First, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional owners of the land from which I'm delivering this talk. My name is Catherine. I'm an artist from Manila, the Philippines, currently finishing her PhD in Sydney, Australia. And my talk is entitled The Ghost of Rain, Petrichor and the Arts. So I am a scientist, artist, and designer by training, and I put all of these fields together and I use them as tools to create these projects about the environment and the tangential societal issues. I've been doing climate change work for 10 years, starting in Singapore, and my most known body of work is the Apocalypse Project. Because the climate crisis is very pervasive and hits every single country in the world, there is no country that is untouched by the climate crisis. I've done this work worldwide. The piece I did in Singapore is called Climate Change Couture. As I did this as an artist in residence at the Singapore ETH Future Cities Laboratory, where I co-designed garments with sustainability researchers, where we ask, what would we wear in the future under climate change? And I created the garments and I photographed the scientists in various places around Singapore. Around that time, where I was doing the residency, Super Typhoon Haiyan slammed southern Philippines. And I felt that this was the year that catalyzed a more intense public discussion on the climate crisis. A caveat to this timeline, of course, is that scientists and environmental activists have been sounding this alarm for decades before 2013. But when it comes to public discourse, I felt this is the year where people were wondering, well, what's climate? How does it differ from the weather? How come there are people denying the climate crisis? What is this big word called the Anthropocene? Why are there so many hurricanes in the tropics, for example? But why is it why there are wildfires in other places in the world? Before evolving to a more nuanced discussion as to the factors affecting or causing the climate crisis to begin with. And finally, the COVID-19, post-COVID-19, and the great big post-colonial reckoning we're all having today. I think art is a very fertile ground to create not just ideas, but potential solutions that we might not be aware of when we're making art, because the beauty of art is that it's useless. It doesn't have a function, but eventually, because of how intense climate change is, in my opinion, maybe there is a function for some of the work that artists do. So for example, I created these flower masks for a climate change couture fashion show at the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto. But years later, I had to use the same mask, pluck them from the gallery where they were being exhibited, and use them in Beijing because that was the only mask that would sufficiently protect me from the smog. This is a piece called The Ephemeral Marvels Perfume Store, a perfume line of things we could lose because of the climate crisis. So these are scents of coast, coffee, ice, wine, and other things in nature that we're losing because of global warming. So smell and memory are closely interlinked. So if you smell the scents, I'm hoping you remember your memories or you associate with the scent and hopefully be inspired to conserve them. Now, the beauty about scent is that it's very abstract. Because of this, I found it very effective when it comes to presenting them in a variety of spaces. So because we are such an ocular-centric or vision-centric society, I'm able to present this very unusual project in art biennials, design museums, and science galleries. Which brings us to one particular scent called Petrichor, the scent of earth after rain. Even though It might be the first time some of you might be encountering this word. This is a scent that we all know. I find it to be a more or less universal scent that all human beings have smelled. It's actually an Australian word in the sense that these scientists, Isabel Joy Baer and Richard Grenfell Thomas, made up the word when they chemically elucidated the scent in the 60s. They did this by taking these soil and rock samples, subjecting them to steam distillation, and they renamed the scent from argillaceous odor, or odor that has to do with clay or clay minerals, to petrichor, petra for stone, and ichor, which means tenuous essence, or the liquid that flows from the veins of the gods. Petrichor is formed from plant oils that the plants secrete through their leaves, for example. These oils volatilize into the atmosphere, eventually incubate in the soil, and the scent is released through rain. We often think of our childhood memories when we smell petrichor, and it's also strongest after a dry spell. Petrichor figures in many cultures. Here are just a few. So in Hindi, it's called miti atar. In Filipino, it's alimuom. In Mandarin, it's chao tuyo. In Korean, it's hognamse. In Finnish, it's satin tuoksu. If you have a word to add to this list, please let me know. Petrichor also figures in indigenous culture. For example, anthropologist Diana Young, whom I am not related to, studies the Aboriginal people in the Western Desert in Australia, specifically the Anangu, Pichanchara, and Yakunchara Aboriginal people. And she found out that they relate petrichor with the color green. So they smell the scent and they think of the green color, in what she calls cultural synesthesia. So here, petrichor signals the new growth that is to come. This is what I think about when I think about petrichor in terms of the climate crisis. Not everyone thinks of petrichor as a pleasant scent of new beginnings. I've interviewed children and youth who have been impacted by super typhoons, and they become very nervous and anxious when they smell rain. But I was able to see what the Aboriginal people meant when I visited the Northern Territory, which is very close to the Western Desert, because the soil there is very red and the colors are very vivid. When it did rain in the desert, I understood what they meant, because the land became so resplendent when it comes to the different colors that you can see in the desert. However, when I first moved to Australia, these were the scenes that greeted me. So I moved to Australia around the time of the Black Summer, or the most intense bushfire season that's caused by the climate crisis. This happened in late 2019 to early 2020. And Australia was burning. In fact, we had haze all over, including near where I lived. So the sky was also very smoky and very hazy, which is something that is very similar to many cities around the world. We're also experiencing smoke. So the thing with the bushfire crisis, this was in 2019, 2020. However, the wildfires in Canada, for example, showed very similar scenarios. And in fact, we could see Australia from space because of how intense the fires were. You can see the outline, also the shape of Australia with this image from a satellite. When I think about petrichor in the bushfire, I think of the building blocks of petrichor, so the plants in the soil turning into ash. So I look at the landscape that is burned by fire, and I'm thinking about petrichor and their ashen residues. So what I did was I collected the ashes and turned them first into ink. So this is ash ink made from the bushfires of Australia. And thinking about the many climate change works that I've created over the years. So for example, I created the sewer soapery, where I made soap out of raw sewage to raise awareness in the fatbergs that are clogging the sewer systems. I work with children and youth to write letters to science denialists, such as climate change deniers, asking them to stand on the side of science. I work with chefs to design dishes of the future. So these are dishes made out of insects, worm cultures for hamburger meat, sea vegetables, and so on. And when you've been doing this for a very long time, you will get a lot of haters on the internet. So I usually get some climate change deniers writing about me or tweeting at me. So this is an extract from an article written about me by a conservative Australian magazine. This is this is a sample of a tweet that I get from people when they see the work. And so what I did with the ink after I actually collect the texts from these people, and using my ink, I rewrote the hate mail I get from climate change deniers, as one does. There is something very ironic about seeing the text written with a material that the text was meant to deny. So it becomes something else. There's like humor, irony, and so on. So let me very quickly read them. She knows just enough chemistry to be dangerous. The term hysterically histrionic may be apt here. Arctic, stable for past half decade. Antarctic, not melting at all. She has a nasty habit of recruiting kids to her climate shenanigans. Warmest, Catherine Young thinks trace CO2 will result in you eating steak made out of worms. Hashtag climate, hashtag hysteria. Why has a taxpayer to continue funding these loons? Another thing I did with the ash was to cast them into human heart sculptures in a project called The Weighing of the Heart. The title of the work references a spell in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where the heart of Imhotep was weighed against a feather. If the scales balance, he enters the afterlife. If it doesn't, then he is condemned. So I look at this piece as a way to emblematize the grief that we all feel when seeing our home, planet Earth, up in flames. And there's so many different emotions associated with grief. We have solastalgia, or the feeling of nostalgia when one is still at home. And also depending on how impacted your life has been because of the bushfires or wildfires, it might increase as well. I've exhibited this as a wall installation, and also digitally we've done something a little bit more hopeful with the C40 campaign. C40 is a collective of mayors of various cities around the world. From Petrichor as ash, I'm going to move on to Petrichor as potentially petroleum. So in the 50s and 60s, there was a theory published wondering whether petrichor, or all of this organic matter in the atmosphere, potentially changes to petroleum over time. I really found this very fascinating. And while it's still an unproven theory, I wonder how our relationships on Earth will change if we revert from thinking with petroleum and thinking about being a petroleum-hungry species, and move on to thinking with petrichor, or a collection of molecules that signals new beginnings. And when it comes to petroleum formation, I think of one place on Earth that has a particularly active set of human activities that are all vying for the petroleum hiding under the Earth. And I'm thinking about the Arctic. And I created this game called Arctic Ice Chess, where we're talking about the melting ice, but also the petroleum that is hidden under the melting ice. So my chessboard is a map of the Arctic and the indigenous people living there. You can also see the various shipping routes that will be in greater use once the ice melts. The pieces, this is the back row, are toy soldiers painted with the flags of the Arctic Council nations. These toy soldiers are encased in ice pieces, whose position in the chess game you can distinguish because of the shape. So you can distinguish the ice, the chess pieces. However, when the game starts and the ice starts to melt, confusion ensues. And this is an example of the board right before playing. The pawns are toy soldiers painted with the flags of countries that are in most danger of sea level rise. So this is a sampling of the various countries around the world. There are only 16 pawns on the chessboard. And around the chessboard are many other countries. We're all just really watching to see what happens. We have Arctic observer countries, countries that have already lost land because of rising sea levels, island nations, and so on. And this is an example of a game in play. So the ice makes it very interesting because depending on the heat from your hand and the temperature of your breath, all of this will contribute to the melting of the ice. You might want control of the piece, but the ice also slips. And when the ice melts, all we have are human figures strewn on the board. I made this game to question our idea of winning. If I checkmate you, but all my pieces melt first, is that really a win? So for me, no one really wins because we all have to get together for the planet. The first game was played in Copenhagen on this boat, MS Arno. And it was played by these two guys, John Rabbe Clemenson, a lecturer at the Institute for Strategy at the Danish Ministry of Defense Academy, versus Gorm Gunnarsson, who is an environmental activist and then candidate for mayor, and curated by Madhu Solfjeld. So in this game, it was a draw. So no one won. In this second game, also in Denmark, we had Keith Brander, who was the lead author for the fisheries and marine ecosystem sections of the fourth IPCC report. And he and his team won a share of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize, versus Jonas Andreas Lisgard, who's associate professor at the Department of Education in Aarhus University. So in this game, Keith won. So apparently his breath pushed a lot of the pieces forward. But what is interesting in both games is that we had these Arctic experts talk about what's going on up there, and talking about things like how does human behavior in one place impact the planet or impact certain conditions in another, showing how interconnected we all are. I think the role of art here is to be able to create these figures or these experiences that are meant to drive these discourse in a way that is constructive. And again, Keith was mentioning that the ice was always slipping, and because we can't really play the game like we want to, we have expectations as to what chess is. Similar to in my previous projects, we have expectations as to what perfume is. And what is a sculpture of a heart, for example. But then art has a way of subverting these figures into something that will help drive or instigate greater discussion about something as complex as climate change into these smaller discussions that are more graspable. And I'm thinking about all of these, talk about the climate crisis. And I'm thinking about how, in a way, we're already bringing the impacts of human activity, or this idea called petromasculinity, or an identity that is powered by fossil fuels into outer space. And I thought about this when I was in the desert in Australia, where a lot of the landscapes looked like a different planet, specifically Mars. And I want to leave you with a project that gets us to think about what exactly do we want to bring to space that's a reflection of what's happening on Earth. So I created a series of prints for this project, Earth Mars. These are cyanotypes of my images of Earth juxtaposed with images of Mars by NASA. I tried to get people to guess which one is Earth, which is Mars. And it's really entertaining, but also really fun to get people to guess which one comes from which planet, and getting that to drive a discourse as to what how do we want planet Earth to be, and how do we want Mars to be. So if you can see the images more closely, it's not a homogeneous Prussian blue color, which for me is very industrial color. Instead, some of the color is broken up by the different browns and yellows that are of the prints that I toned using experimental botanical and soil inks. So in this way, the building blocks of Petrichor, like the plants and the soil, are the ones breaking up the homogeneity of blue in this case. And so with this, I want to leave you with that thought, like what is the scent, or what is the type of identity we want to bring forth, not just on Earth, but also wherever humans end up in the world. Thanks very much.